Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're having a peaceful weekend. Tonight, we're diving into 5 of the most chilling cases in American history. Cases involving children, where the prime suspect wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows, but the very people meant to protect them, their own parents. When reputation, personal gain, or a secret too dangerous to be exposed becomes more important than a child's life, what happens next? Some of these cases may have started as tragic accidents, but the way they were covered up, staged, and manipulated turned them into haunting mysteries that still shake the world today. We like to believe that home is the safest place for a child, but these cases tell a different story. Is this the dark side of society? A world where morals are twisted and the truth can be buried just to keep a name clean in the headlines? If you're watching this video, chances are you're someone who seeks to understand the truth behind these unsolved mysteries. Stay with me until the end to see how many of these cases you already know, and which one leaves the biggest mark on you. Before we get into the details, take a second to support this channel with a like and subscribe. And if anything in this video leaves you questioning, drop a comment below. We'll break it down together. Now, let's begin our journey into the 5 most unsettling cases of children who never got the chance to grow up. 1. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann, 2007. Madeleine McCann was just 3 years old when she vanished without a trace on the night of May 3, 2007. She was on vacation with her family at the Praia da Luz resort in Portugal. That evening, her parents, Jerry and Kate McCann, put their 3 children to bed in their apartment, Unit 5A, before heading to a nearby restaurant with friends. They checked on the kids periodically, but at around 10 p.m., when Kate returned to the room, she found Madeleine's bed empty, the window wide open. She screamed in terror, and just like that, one of the most infamous missing child cases in modern history began. Portuguese authorities launched an investigation immediately, but from the very start, critical mistakes were made. The scene was never properly secured, and people, family, police, neighbors, walked in and out of the apartment, contaminating potential evidence. There were no clear signs of forced entry, leaving police to question whether this was an abduction at all. Witness accounts only made things murkier. One woman, Jane Tanner, claimed she saw a man carrying a small child toward the beach at 9:15 p.m. Another witness, Martin Smith, recalled seeing a similar figure with a child around 10 p.m. Yet no one could identify him. Then came the game-changing discovery. British police brought in cadaver dogs, specially trained to detect the scent of human remains. The dogs alerted to traces of a body in Madeleine's bedroom, as well as inside the trunk of a rental car her parents had used in the weeks following her disappearance. This revelation sent shockwaves through the case. Was it possible that Jerry and Kate McCann had accidentally caused their daughter's death and covered it up? But despite the mounting suspicions, no physical evidence directly linked them to a crime. The investigation stalled, and public opinion became deeply divided. Some believed Madeleine had been kidnapped and sold into human trafficking. Others suspected that her parents had been involved, staging a kidnapping to hide an accident. The case took an even wilder turn as international media latched onto it. Tabloids churned out sensational theories, some claiming Madeleine had been taken to another country, others speculating she had been murdered. Conspiracy theories spiraled out of control, with claims of involvement from powerful underground networks. As the chaos grew, so did the attacks on the McCanns. Accusations, public scrutiny, relentless questioning. One of the most persistent theories was that Madeleine had fallen victim to a human trafficking ring. At the time, Portugal was known as a hotspot for international child trafficking. With her blonde hair, striking eyes, and a unique fleck in her iris, Madeleine would have stood out, potentially making her a target for wealthy buyers or criminal syndicates. But if this was the case, why was there never a ransom demand? And why, after nearly 2 decades, has there been no credible sighting of her? In 2020, German authorities named Christian Bruckner as the prime suspect. A convicted sex offender who had lived near Praia da Luz at the time, Bruckner had a history of abusing children and had already served time for unrelated crimes. Yet, even with this revelation, there was no solid proof tying him to Madeleine's disappearance. So, where did Madeleine McCann go? Was she truly abducted, or did something else happen that night? Nearly 20 years later, the case remains one of the most haunting mysteries of our time, plagued by investigative failures, media frenzy, and endless unanswered questions. And to this day, the world is still waiting for the truth. 2. The case of Caylee Anthony. Caylee Anthony was just 2 years old when she vanished in the summer of 2008. But the strangest part of this case wasn't her disappearance. It was everything that happened after. 6 months passed before her remains were found, and in all that time, her mother, Caylee Anthony, never reported her missing. The truth only came to light when Caylee's grandmother, Cindy Anthony, made a frantic 911 call on July 15, 2008, saying she hadn't seen her granddaughter in over a month. She also mentioned something chilling. Casey's car smelled like there had been a dead body inside. Police quickly got involved, but what they discovered made the case even more disturbing. Caylee Anthony lied about everything. She told investigators that Caylee had been kidnapped by a nanny named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. But when detectives dug deeper, they found no evidence that such a person had ever existed. Caylee also claimed she had been searching for her daughter the whole time, but for 31 days, while Caylee was supposedly missing, Caylee showed no signs of distress. Instead, she partied, spent time with friends, and even got a new tattoo that read Bella Vita, Italian for beautiful life. The public was outraged. What kind of mother acts this way when her child is missing? As the investigation continued, more red flags appeared. A search on Caylee's computer revealed that someone had looked up the word chloroform and how to make someone unconscious. Traces of chloroform were also found in the trunk of Caylee's car. Then, cadaver dogs alerted to the presence of human decomposition in that same trunk. But despite all these clues, there was still no direct evidence showing how Caylee had died, or if Caylee had actually killed her. Then, on December 11, 2008, 6 months after she had vanished, Caylee's remains were discovered in a wooded area near Caylee's home. The body was badly decomposed, but one disturbing detail stood out. Duct tape had been placed over Caylee's mouth and nose. That single piece of tape became the strongest piece of evidence that this was a homicide. But it also created a major problem. Because Caylee's body had deteriorated so much, the medical examiner couldn't determine an official cause of death. Prosecutors argued that Caylee had drugged her daughter with chloroform and then suffocated her with the tape. The defense countered with a shocking claim that Caylee had accidentally drowned in the family's pool, and Caylee had panicked, leading to a cover-up. The trial of Caylee Anthony in 2011 became one of the most controversial cases in U.S. history. Prosecutors laid out a compelling argument, pointing to the evidence in Caylee's car and her suspicious online searches. But the biggest issue remained. There was no definitive proof that Caylee had murdered Caylee. Her defense team took advantage of this, attacking the prosecution's case for its inconsistencies. Then they threw a curveball, claiming that Caylee had been a victim of sexual abuse at the hands of her father, George Anthony, and that years of trauma had caused her to react differently to stress, explaining her lack of emotion and erratic behavior. After 6 weeks in court, the jury delivered a verdict that sent shockwaves through the country. Caylee Anthony was found not guilty of first-degree murder. She was only convicted of lying to police and was released soon after. The public erupted in outrage. Protests broke out, condemning the justice system. Many believed Caylee had killed her daughter but had managed to walk free because there was no physical evidence tying her to the crime. Prosecutors were stunned, but there was nothing they could do. Under the law, a person cannot be convicted based on suspicion alone. The biggest question remains unanswered. How did Caylee Anthony really die? If this was an accident, why did Casey lie for a month? Why were there chloroform searches on her computer? Why was Caylee's body dumped in the woods with duct tape covering her mouth? Justice may have been served in the courtroom, but in the court of public opinion, Caylee Anthony is anything but innocent. This case remains one of the most disturbing, frustrating, and unresolved mysteries of modern times. And at the heart of it all, a little girl who never got the justice she deserved. 3. The case of Jessica Lunsford. Jessica Lunsford was just 9 years old when she became the victim of one of the most horrifying crimes in American history. She lived in Homosassa, Florida, a little girl who loved the color pink, adored playing with her dolls, and always had a bright smile when she was with her family. But on the night of February 23, 2005, Jessica went to bed in what she believed was the safest place in the world, her own home. She had no idea that just hours later, a monster was lurking in the shadows, ready to take her away. And from that moment on, the entire country would watch in horror as one of the most gut-wrenching cases of child abduction unfolded. The next morning, Jessica's grandfather went into her room to wake her up, but she was gone. Her bed was empty, her blankets undisturbed, as if she had vanished into thin air. The doors were locked, the windows shut. There were no signs of forced entry. Her family called 911 and a massive search began. But one crucial detail stood out. Just a few houses away, a convicted sex offender named John Evander Cooey was living in a rundown trailer. Police knocked on Cooey's door in the early days of the investigation, but because they didn't have a warrant, they weren't allowed to search inside. What they didn't know was that Jessica was still alive, being held captive in that very house. She had been tied up, gagged, and kept in a dark, filthy closet. Over the next few days, she was subjected to unimaginable abuse. She had no food, no water, and no way to escape. But the worst was yet to come. After nearly a week, Cooey decided he had to get rid of her. He stuffed Jessica into a trash bag, tied her hands, and carried her to a shallow grave near his house. She was still breathing, still awake, still hoping someone would come to save her. But no one did. He buried her alive, leaving her with nothing but a stuffed animal in her arms. 24 days later, Jessica's body was found. And the truth was even more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. During the autopsy, investigators discovered that Jessica had fought for her life. Inside the trash bag, there were scratch marks where she had tried to claw her way out. Her tiny fingers had dug into the plastic, desperate for air. She had struggled, she had screamed, and she had gasped for breath until there was none left. A 9-year-old girl had been buried alive just a few doors away from her own home. Once the truth was uncovered, police immediately returned to Cooey's house, and this time, he had nowhere to run. When arrested, he confessed to everything. He spoke in chilling detail about what he had done, showing no remorse, even admitting that he had watched Jessica take her final breaths as he covered her with dirt. But perhaps the most infuriating part of this case wasn't just Cooey's monstrous actions. It was the fact that he never should have been free in the first place. John Cooey was a repeat offender, with a long history of crimes against children. He should have been monitored. He should have been in prison. But because of a weak and failing legal system, he was allowed to roam free, until he found Jessica. And she was the one who paid the ultimate price. The murder of Jessica Lunsford shook the nation. People were outraged, demanding change. How could a convicted child predator be allowed to live in a neighborhood without anyone being warned? How could the police have knocked on his door while Jessica was still alive inside and left? This case exposed massive failures in the justice system and led to one of the most significant legal reforms in history. Jessica's law was passed shortly after her death. It introduced mandatory minimum sentences of 25 years for child sex offenders and required strict monitoring for life. Today, versions of this law exist in multiple states, ensuring that predators like Cooey can never walk free again. But for Jessica's family, no law can bring her back. A little girl who loved pink, who laughed with her family, who should have had her whole life ahead of her, was buried in a plastic bag, alone, just a few steps away from home. Her story is one of pain, injustice, and a failure to protect the most innocent among us, and it will never be forgotten. Thank you for watching until the end. These are just 3 out of the 5 cases I mentioned. In the next video, I'll cover the remaining 2, diving even deeper into the details. If there's a specific case you'd like me to analyze in a future video, drop a comment below. I'll research it and share my own thoughts on the case. See you in the next video.